जी, अभी हम मौजूद हैं वियना डिप्लोमेट एकेडमी में, जहां पर पाकिस्तान एम्बेसी की जानिब से प्रोग्राम किया जा रहा है। चलें आए देखते हैं कि कितने लोग यहां पे आते हैं और कौन कौन से डिप्लोमेट्स यहां पे मौजूद हैं। लेट्स गो।
Unstable global order concerns how countries interact, but also how multilateral institutions, the global governments and the national governments interact or should interact. Reforms are very difficult, as we experience all the time, I have to say, and especially when you have a power situation where the so it's very hard to convince them to make it possible, and I'm especially talking about the UN system with all its elements, and the fact that even now, when the WHO finally has agreed on the text for a pandemic, because they are interested in multilateral cooperation, they are interested in a lot of these global issues because of their situation. And second, our superpower stable system. But at the same time, people powers have their own interests. Sometimes these interests are not the interests. And the third point is very obvious. We see it now in the Ukraine war. The need to have mediation has changed from what we used to call mediation places of neutral countries, also some other Arab countries in the group. So there is nothing more relevant situation of these middle powers and what they can contribute to a different and more peaceful world. And we have this afternoon or evening, let me say that my heart goes out to the victims of the attack on a bus in Pakistan this morning, where school children were killed by a terrorist.
Excellency, Madam Hina Rabbani Khar. She has been the Minister and Chair of the Foreign Relations Committee of the National Assembly of Pakistan. We are delighted to have her online with us. Madam, many thanks for joining us today. You have the floor. We can't hear you, Madam.
Sorry, can you hear me now?
Yes, Madam, you're now audible. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. In what is truly becoming almost a permanent time of unpeace for the region, that my condemnation and obviously condolences to the victims of 3 children and 2 persons who have lost their lives in Khuzdar, in a suicide bomb attack on school-going bus children. I realize that I speak to an audience which is a very well-informed audience. I also realize that I speak to an audience which is based in a city which hosts many of the multilateral, which is home to many multilateral institutions. And that gives you a unique place in the conversation that we are having today. I also realize that you play home to the IAEA. And as we've seen, conflict can flag, create systems and institutions which could create pathways for a more peaceful world. I feel that as we speak to each other today, we are living in a world which no more seeks that peace or that calm or calibration. I've been asked to speak on opportunities and challenges for middle powers in geopolitical order. And I warn you that I speak as a practitioner of foreign policy, as someone who was Foreign Minister of Pakistan back in 2010, uninterruptible and uninterrupted in its quest for peace, coexistence, prosperity for its people. So I am not going to fool myself or anyone else by thinking that we are talking about the role of middle powers in a world which has geopolitical, which has been more disorderly as the one that we are experiencing today. And I'm just going to try in the next 10 minutes or so to briefly talk about the international scenario and why we are almost living in an age of unpeace, as Martin calls it, and what are the reasons for that. And what I'm sharing with you how that geopolitical disorder, in some ways, at the international level, has seeped down into our region, and created circumstances for belligerent behavior by states which are perhaps larger than others. So, having broken the myth of a geopolitical order as we speak, let me just say that I think one reason for that is that we have tried to use instruments of order selectively. Vocabulary of humanity to wage war and create serious circumstances for killing, starvation, and a perpetuation of conflict. And us having to just, allow that to happen has led the recognition of the very architecture and the instruments of peace. And I will perhaps, the best example to give for that is the liberal use of, countries which were seen to be doing some things outside of international law, but have sat aside on far bigger crimes being committed in front of, live on television. I think that has created a world where, selective use of force, selective use of sanctions, selective use of instruments has taken the credibility of the multilateral institutions and the tools that are at our disposal to create peace away. And that has also taken the predictability of them to be used as effective multilateral institutions to be arbitrators on basis of rules, laws, and circumstances, and not had a huge impact, because when it comes to democracy or human rights or human killings, the selectiveness in who to impose those sanctions on because of them being outside of law and who not to has led to a disarray and a lack of credibility of that entire human rights architecture. And I think that has been a very, very, very costly exercise. Now, holder of peace. We look at Europe in many ways as a perpetual holder of values. We look at Europe as a partner in a common to march towards a future which is collective. And when we see that, whether they be in the middle powers side or whether they be on the other side. I saw that the opening, the mention of UN reforms and of reforms as such. I think it is really important to recognize that true reforms and truly reforms can only happen in very stable geopolitical environment, rather than giving everybody a chance to be able to play the rightful role as a sovereign state. Now, as we go forward, what we have also seen, as much as celebrated as they may have been in Western powers or in Western countries, the impact of that in the geographies where those wars were has been far less glorified. And people have not seen these to be means for more extremism. In my country, for instance, before the Afghanistan war, there was literally one suicide intervention. There was a time when we had, multiple suicides of extremism, and all of these agencies of conflict. Be able to coexist, be able to understand each other's existence, just to accept each other's existence, and come away from conflict and be able to live, coexist and searching for peace and prosperity rather than conflict. Now, in that, I come to the specifics of people, including 3 children, and Many others were injured in the province of Balochistan, which happens to be a partner, a friendly partner, strategic, many other things. So it has created a lot of fear in the West, which has created these circumstances for decoupling or de-risking or whatever we call it, which is kind of not understandable to a person like me who grew up in a world where we talked about a global village and of all of us coexistence. This is one area of the world where we have two nuclear states, neighboring nuclear states, who have had conflict in the past, but we had hoped that we'd be able to recover from that and go towards, mutual respect for each other's existence and towards prosperity. Now, recently what happened is, and I want to defend our sovereignty and strike in India, in by saying that we have, with this conflagration, this will not stay within our region and will become increasingly an international problem. We should look towards countries in Europe to be the protectors of the multilateral order. And when we allow countries and places to be able to go beyond that, I think it becomes a very, very dangerous. The normalization of that is exceptionally dangerous, not only for regional peace, but also for international peace.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Gerhard. Thank you for inviting us. Another big round of applause for Madam Hina Rabbani Khar. We would now. Our next panelist is Excellency Ambassador Gerhard Seiler. Ambassador Gerhard Seiler is currently Deputy Director General Political and Belarus. Mr. Seiler was also Deputy Director to the Diplomatic Academy of Vienna. Excellency. Discussions. So my first question is for Excellency Song. Excellency, world has witnessed remarkable development in China in all elements of national power. However, China has always aligned itself with developing world and middle powers. Please help us understand China's policies towards middle powers, particularly.
Very impressive audience, and I do believe that this is a very good opportunity for both of all of us to benefit from each other regarding our views and power in this in the current world. And my views so that we invite more thoughtful ideas from colleagues, from panelists and audience. Regarding middle power, I believe I can decide on middle powers. But with my experiences over the past 3 decades of multilateral business, my personal understanding of middle power is that middle power, the role of middle power can only happen in the post-Cold War era. And the role of middle power will be even more meaningful and era. And to me, a middle power means a country which is not necessarily regarded itself as a superpower, so-called, but has the responsibility, the sense of responsibility, and multipolar world to multilateralism. In this regard, I believe there will be more and more countries, especially from the global south. To our mind, as middle power is Pakistan. So both of us have our experiences in working together with colleagues from Pakistan in New York, in Geneva, here in Vienna, and a wider range of multilateral world that Pakistani ambassadors and colleagues are making their respective contribution to the UN effort, to the UN cause. And I don't need to get into those details about what kind of role we are playing, but everybody will recognize that the role that you have been playing is a very good example or model as middle power. And so this leads to my personal elaboration of what kind of role a middle power should play in this contribution as diplomats or as scholars. And for me, I believe that middle power should be meaningful contributor to multilateralism, to this multipolarized world. And in this regard, middle power should work together to guard against the temptation or even the phenomenon of hegemonism or unilateralism or anything against globalization, anything against multilateralism. So this is, as my understanding, first and foremost role that middle power can play. And this is all exactly an effort that China had always been working together with wider range of countries, middle powers, to make our due contribution. And secondly, in this current world, the so-called post-Cold War world, but we still have to face this kind of phenomenon that Cold War mentality is still with us, and the so-called big power competition is still with us, and all those things that all those policies, temptations, or efforts to continue to divide the world between superpower and the rest of the world, or between the competition of superpowers and other international members. So my point is that I believe that middle power should not be those countries who are supposed to take sides or benefit from taking sides between certain so-called major powers. That if we have to take sides, we should take sides with multilateralism. We should take sides with the vast majority of international community, members of international community and new members. And in this regard, we can make our common contribution to the wider range of interest of the members of the international community of your memberships. So this is my second point. And certainly, I think middle power can and should play an even bigger role to contribute to the cause of the UN, to multilateralism, each and every specific field. In New York, here in Vienna, in each and every international organizations. And this is exactly what we have been doing. And this is, frankly speaking, this is exactly what I have been, I would say, mostly benefit or enjoy by working together with colleagues in the Vienna multilateral platform. Because Karl with so many ambassadors representing middle powers here, and I think this is what we are paid for, to make our concrete contributions. And then I believe that middle power should play our due role to international and regional peace and security. So on the one hand, each and every country has the legitimate right and responsibility to preserve our legitimate interest against hegemonism, against the coercion from or bullying from bigger world in regional peace and security. And this is exactly the role that regarding the political and diplomatic effort to address the Ukrainian crisis, we have this group of Friends for Peace, and China is working closely with Brazil and so many other countries that can be regarded as middle powers to make our contribution. And on the issue of the crisis of Gaza, here in Vienna we have this group of Friends for Palestine, that we are also making our contribution to peace and security. So this is some role that I believe that it's high time for middle power to play, mediator or whatever effort in this regard. And then I believe that middle power should play our due role for development, for common development development benefiting global south. And this is as important as the cause in the UN, which we call peace and security. I think development is the future. I would say development is the future of UN. And why, on the one hand, we have to tackle the challenges, political and security challenges, so that we can preserve or rebuild peace and security. But at the same time, I think for the vast majority of UN member states, especially countries from the global south, development is what we really need daily and continuously. So I think in this regard, middle power should work together to support the cause of the UN for sustainable development, and also support each and every effort on multilateral platforms for international development cooperation and so on and so forth. And in this regard, I think it's also, given the latest developments of international situations and challenges, I think middle power also supposed, I would say, to work together to preserve the existing international economic order, trade system based on rule-based trade system, and also this is what we call the universally beneficial and inclusive economic globalization, and also the equal and ordered multipolar world. I think this is something that can benefit all the countries, including middle powers, and this is exactly the role middle power can play and can make our due contribution. For China, we always believe that we belong to the global south, the developing world, and we never regard ourselves as any kind of so-called superpower according to the Cold War mindset, and we are not competing with any other countries. I think we will continue to make our due contribution to the cause of the UN multilateralism and multipolar world. And in this process, I think we stand ready to work closely with middle power for this common cause of international community. So I'll stop here. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Part of those efforts, and I'm very happy that this was successful. We work also on counterterrorism. Indeed, we had a very good event only yesterday, I think, on preventing violent extremism, which we worked together with the UN and with Pakistan, and also, of course, condolences from our side for the victims of the attack. We've seen too many attacks, we've seen too much terrorism, and unfortunately, this is a subject that Pakistan knows very well. And we owe it to do what we can to support you in this fight, of course. When we reflect on the concept of middle power, the first thing we thought of Pakistan. I reminded myself of the concept of the Middle Empire with the China, but this is a slightly different concept. Yes. And I was asked myself whether the European Union was a middle power. I'm not sure we have thought about that. I'm quite sure that we don't see ourselves as a superpower. And your question implies that we have some middle powers among our member states. I'd like to thank Minister Rabbani for referring to our experience in Europe, which is one of devastating conflict, not just in the 20th century, but for many centuries. And I think it's important to remember that the European Union concept and success, I think we have to say today, as we celebrate also 30 years of Austrian membership in the European Union, is not, or at least not only out of the virtue of the Europeans, it's out of the devastation and the depth of our tragedy and our catastrophe on this continent. And we, in the first place, of course, wanted to make peace amongst ourselves. We were enemies. You go back 100 years, the situation was really very difficult. We had the First World War, we had the Second World War, and to make peace was not easy. But in a certain way, because of the leadership of strong and vision of strong political leaders, we celebrate this year 75 years of the speech of Robert Schuman. It's really worth reading. And of course, as I said, this was about peace amongst ourselves. Gradually, we also, of course, understood that if we want to have a say in this new world, it was in the first place the Cold War, but also in the post-Cold War era, we have to stick together. Alone, the individual member states will not have the same clout, the same voice, the same attention as we do if we act together. This is obvious for anyone who works as a European in the United Nations every day. Even on small issues, we are asked, this EU statement, do all member states really agree with this? And we say yes, because we spend hours in EU coordination, and when they see that we do, they listen carefully. So this is our way of making sure that we have a say. Of course, we have to agree. It's not always easy, but we have to be strong together. We have to be united. We have to work. To what extent this experience can be translated and transposed to other regions, this is for them, for each region to see. Of course, we hope so. And I think many who come to us, they say that from those other regions, they say that they hope so too. But of course, it's not easy. So, and we don't want to preach or moralize, we understand the complications. But all the more, therefore, a strong sense for us that we want to protect it. Because we are a union of 27 member states, we continue with our enlargement, will be more, I think, quite soon. We have a very complex set of rules. We are a legal order. We have a court. We have a treaty that applies before national law. We have the right for citizens to go to the European Union Court of Justice if they are not well treated. So, constitutionally, therefore, we are also in favor of international law, international order, international humanitarian law, the UN system, the UN Charter. What works for us, we also believe, works for the world. This is what brings stability. This is what protects, especially small countries and middle countries, against, as you said, Ambassador, superpower bullying. And so we feel strongly about this, and I think this goes for all European countries, that this is something that we need to protect and uphold. We must give it the support, the resources, and the means to function. And we must engage in a way to make sure that it does function and can protect small countries, can uphold international rules, whether in trade, you're right, Ambassador, or in foreign policy, security issues, even the most serious issues, things like the non-proliferation treaty, for instance. So we have built this. It's an incredible achievement, and we have to make sure that it's not undone, and we have to protect it. And I think this, and I agree with you, this is a responsibility of all countries, but in particular countries who have means to do so, and to engage actively. And I agree very much. Pakistan, in my experience from New York, in Geneva, and also here, is a country that plays way above its weight in the UN. Always very active, whether it's in the context, whether it's in a national capacity, or representing or coordinating the non-aligned movement, or the Group of 77 in China, or the Organization of Islamic Countries. Pakistan is remarkably active and influential. We have to say this because it's really a compliment that is deserved. So I'm happy to say that, and I think it's a good example. There are other countries who are less active. We encourage all the countries we speak to be active, in the UN system, because this is the way we come together. We have said this, I think, in recent years, because it was mentioned to the countries of the Gulf, and we see that they are coming to the UN, they want to host meetings, they want to be active. This is what we want to see. It's not a bad thing that there are more who want to have a say. It's a good thing. It's a good thing. Maybe it makes it more difficult on some issues to agree, but it's worth it. It's worth it, because this is the way we keep order and peace in the world. And for us, as Europeans, this is very obvious, because this is the way we work ourselves as European Union. So my encouragement will be the same as yours, Ambassador, that we should all come to the UN, we should all give it a meet, we should support it, and we should respect the rules that on which it is based. And when those rules are violated, we should say so. And I think, of course, we would think in the first place of Ukraine and the need to condemn those violations, but it should be true for all cases. And this is the kind of system that will preserve peace in the world, and this is what will protect not only middle powers, but also small countries. And in these unstable times, I think it's particularly important, and I want to thank Pakistan for making a big contribution to this, because this is really what has been my experience in all of the multilateral postings that I've been to. Thank you very much.
Thank you. The question is, Turkey stands at the crossroads connecting Asia with Europe geographically, and a member of NATO and a member of ECU. So from your vantage point, how does Turkey see the contemporary geopolitical order and the role of middle powers?
Thank you. Allow me to start by expressing my condolences for the victims of the terrorist attack this morning. My heart goes out to the families of those victims and the people of Pakistan.
Thank you.
As you must recognize, peace at home, peace in the world. So this has been the guiding principle of Turkish foreign policy ever since 1923 was established. As you point at the fact that Turkey is located in between West and East, its geographical location not only labels but also makes it imperative for Turkey to pursue mediation role in its foreign policy. And a number of examples that I can just give here, but one very important one is which is taking place for the last more than 3 years actually between Russia and Ukraine. The ongoing war claimed the lives of more than 1 million people so far. It's a big tragedy, and Turkey's one of the priorities of Turkish foreign policy is to bring this war to an end, of course, between the parties, and at least to minimize damage on population, peoples, as well as the environment and the region. So far, Turkey has taken a number of initiatives to mediate between the parties and came close to certain agreements, but there are too many difficulties that you can appreciate, but at least its efforts have culminated a number of times in reaching an agreement for prisoners exchange, the last of which was reached last Friday, last week, between Russian and Ukrainian delegations met in Istanbul, and 1,000 prisoners from both sides have been sent to their homes. So in this respect, in the same context, Turkey has mediated again between Russia and Ukraine in the so-called Black Sea Ukraine deal, which was very violent populations. So when we look at the fundamental characteristics of middle powers, since this is the subject matter, we see a number of commonalities, and one of which is that they have significant economic and military power. They have some historical ties with the regions where they are located. They advocate multilateral cooperation and institutions, and they promote rules-based international order and mediation. So in that respect, as I said, Turkey mediated between Russia and Ukraine. There is also another recent example which was successful and culminated in and resulted with a declaration in December 2024 last year between Ethiopia and Somalia who have been struggling for many years on maritime dispute, which is not only technically but also both a very complicated issue. With this, in this respect, Turkey also cooperates with a number of other countries from around the world, like-minded countries as we call them, and for MICTA, which stands for Mexico, Indonesia, Korea, Turkey, and Australia, all of whom have common prospects in terms of especially promoting governance in international organizations, reforms in international organizations, the most important of which is, of course, the one that should take, and most of us agree, I believe, in the United Nations in all its structure, but specifically in the composition of the United Nations Security Council. And in that respect, our President, Recep Tayyip Erdogan, is known for his famous statement that the world is bigger than five, and that the fate and the destiny of 194 countries cannot be left to only a handful of countries which have the right to veto any decision that come before the Council. So there are also some political major issues where Turkey gets involved with, of course, its good offices in terms of bringing an end to hostilities and pave the way to some, at least leave some room for diplomacy, such as the one in Libya. More than 5 years ago, Libya was in total chaos. The situation currently is not, of course, a garden of roses, but there are too many developments, and at least Turkey's involvement militarily, to a certain extent, as well as politically and diplomatically, changed the situation, the dynamics on the ground, and enable, at least help United Nations support mission in Libya to effectively, perform its duties for the cessation of hostilities. Again, of course, there are lots of things to be done with the contribution of many countries. But what we can see from the sort of correspondence between the United Nations and its offices and special representatives to Libya, there are a few countries, one of which is Turkey, which Libya may have its democratic and popularly supported country with a new governance structure, and Turkey is again doing its best and with the lessons learned from other developments that have taken place in the region, such as the one in Iraq since 2003, and Turkey helps the Syrian people, and beyond having helped over the last 13 years by being home for more than 3 million people who were our neighbors and our guests. We are not calling them merely migrants. So these are things that Turkey has found itself engaged in the international arena. Actually, Turkey is one of the, I would say, an upper middle powers with some of its capabilities, such as far as I know, I'm too new in diplomacy. I have a more than 3-decade-old academic career and not less than 3-month-old diplomatic career, if I can call it a career now. But I know that Turkey has 262 diplomatic representative offices all over the world, ranking the third country after the United States and China. So that is a big power and soft power. And also, for instance, with respect to Africa, there are 54 countries on the continent, 44 of which Turkey has its embassies. And for 38 African countries, Ankara, the capital of Turkey, has become the hub for the diplomatic representative offices. And one more figure which might excite you, and I believe many of you have entertained this already, enjoyed this. Turkish Airlines is flying to 130 countries, and it's #1 in that respect. So, with many economic, political, diplomatic, and corporate capabilities, Turkey is more than a middle power country and strives for more to help improve the political situation in the world in line with the founding dictum of its foreign policy, which is peace at home, peace in all. Thank you.
Yes, ladies and gentlemen, it's an honor and a privilege to address this esteemed audience in the Diplomatic Academy of Vienna. Allow me to express my special thanks to Ambassador Kamran Akhtar of Pakistan, who extended the kind invitation for me to participate in today's seminar. I had the opportunity to visit Pakistan in 2019 alongside Dr. Fazland and General Feitlinger in a visit initiated by Dr. Absarata, who is also with us. The first thing I noticed, I was told Haider is a very common name in Pakistan, so immediately I felt very much at home there. Pakistan is a country of remarkable variety and resilience, playing a constructive role in regional stability, climate diplomacy and refugee support, despite facing significant economic and security challenges. We were briefed about all these issues, also on Kashmir and on especially also the problem of Afghanistan. We had given a chance to visit Kashmir and see firsthand, meet with the leaders there and also meet refugees. The global landscape is evolving with remarkable speed and complexity, marked by uncertainty and profound shifts in power dynamics. And many global conflicts have religious dimensions. Interfaith cooperation can be instrumental in peace building, especially in divided societies. Faith leaders can mediate tensions, encourage reconciliation, and act as moral voices against violence and injustice. A just international order requires that all voices, religious, secular, and cultural, are heard. I remember we had every year our organization does an event commemorating the Interfaith Harmony Week. And this year we had Bishop Humphrey Peters from Peshawar in here, and he spoke to us, and we could see how really one of the most exemplary Christians I ever met finds a good way to cooperate in, like as a small minority in Pakistan, in one of the most delicate areas. In today's deeply polarized world, it is imperative and middle powers work to bridge religious divides, counter extremist narratives, and promote educational initiatives that encourage empathy and mutual respect. So what we really need is new peace narratives. This was the topic from last year of our Interfaith Harmony of Pluralism, Human Dignity and Democratic Value. This means not only condemning hate speech, but also investing in inclusive policies, social cohesion, and grassroots dialogue. Interreligious harmony is the prerequisite for people of all religions to recognize their common human dignity. Only then can a common path to an international order emerge. People's souls need a spiritually cultivated foundation that transcends human activity and daily life challenges. I am very pleased to inform you that the coalition of faith-based organizations, which started in the UN in Vienna during a crime commission conference, as it is just happening now, initiated its third chapter in Pakistan in October 2024. The launch led by Dr. Akhtar marks a significant step towards fostering interfaith dialogue and harmony in South Asia. And I must say I was very impressed when I saw this inauguration organized by Minhaj University in Lahore, where 1,000 people came together from the region and internationally to make this real strong demonstration how important interfaith and interreligious cooperation is. The United Nations remains the cornerstone of global cooperation. Despite its imperfection, it continues to be the most legitimate platform for multilateral engagement. Middle powers have a duty to strengthen the UN system, advocate for institutional reform, and support its essential work in peace-building, humanitarian assistance, and intercultural dialogue. I will finish by introducing a proposal which the founder of the Universal Peace Federation, the late Dr. Sun Myung Moon, made already in August 2000. The existing United Nations structure, composed of national representatives, may be regarded as a congress where the interests of each member nation are represented. However, I submit that serious consideration should be given to forming a council of religious representatives within the structure of the United Nations. This assembly or council would consist of respected spiritual leaders in fields such as religion, culture, and education. The wisdom and vision of religious leaders will substantially supplement the political insight, experience, and skill of the world's political leaders and will be able to make great advances in ushering in a world of peace. And I also have to respect the fact that since 1 or 2 weeks we have a new Pope. And he is always an actor. We can see he was noticed. The whole world was there when the old Pope was at his funeral, and when the new Pope was inaugurated. World leaders, Donald Trump, his vice president, and many, many others were there. Why? Because everyone realizes we have to respect the relevance of religion. And in his speech to media representatives, Pope Leo XIV immediately co-opted journalists and journalism in general for his campaign for peace. We must say no to the war of words and images. We must reject the paradigm of war. We do not need loud, violent communication. Let us disarm words, and we will help disarm the world. A disarmed and disarming communication always allows us to share a different view of the world and act in a way that is in accordance with our human dignity. And I must say it is my great honor that one of the heroes of establishing a treaty which goes against weapons is among us. It is Ambassador Kamran. Give him a big hand because he was instrumental
Thank you, Excellency. And thank you, Excellency, for being here, for being with us. So, the contemporary geopolitical order. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you also for my big thanks to the Diplomatic Academy, where I happen to be also the Deputy Director
couple of years. And thank you, the Embassy of Pakistan, to organize this event, or co-organize this event, of course. Yeah, it's a tricky question. I think maybe I give a few thoughts about how we understand neutrality in context, maybe to bring in context of the middle power question. Of course, about middle powers features, so much has already been said that I won't take all of that what is in my package here. And at the end, I would like to mention maybe what for me are the positive elements where the middle powers can use their background, can use their know-how, and why they are maybe more prepared in one way or the other for example, mitigation of conflicts, or making some co-management in wars. Yeah, of course, Austrian neutrality. I grew up with neutrality in school. We had songs about neutrality. We had Brigitte is smiling, but maybe we had this only in Styria, in the province where I grew up. But it was when it was created or decided, it was in a way a political concession that was made during the negotiations ending the Austrian occupation in 55. Let's say 55 was already the end point, and from then it entered our identity. It had provided some links, I would say, between different political factions in Austria. It had its role. It had its let's say also competence when much of the neutrality was useful to create the Vienna as a seat, one of the headquarters of the United Nations and other international organizations, the OAC. But it went then, of course, it underwent historical changes when we entered the European Union. I still remember it very well. It was in 95, so exactly 30 years, we have our 30 years jubilee. We end up without, let's say, imminently feeling that it underwent a change. But of course, feeling that feeling when war re-entered Europe more than 3 years ago, this feeling of that somehow they changed was, of course, more imminent. I mean, we had it defined already in treaties. We had make additional paras to our constitution in 95, but we got conscious that it is a military neutrality also in our positions, and we saw that actually it was also before maybe military neutrality, because even if we look back in very early stages of the neutrality, 56, we took the 80 or 100,000 refugees from Hungary. We took our positions, so it was not so. Actually, it was not so much of a change. Maybe it was only a change because. Of course, politically, we had joined the European Union in 95, and the European Union took a political side, and we are within the political union. But coming back to the middle powers, what how the interaction between neutrality and middle powers interact. Of course, neutrality also has advantages on the global stage. not only because we have the seat of the mentioned organizations, but also you have more, you have in a way more flexibility. Particularly as when we see middle powers, I think it's very difficult to define. Actually, when I browsed through the net some days ago, there are so many lists of middle powers differing. In one list makes in some lists Austria is mentioned as a middle power because due to the fact that we can sometimes, or we could sometimes punch up above our weight through the international organizations. Sometimes we are not continuing if you take the geographical size or let's say the military force. But there is of course some, but with the negotiations on with Israel and the Hamas, or with involvement in prisoner of war negotiations, they might be seen as a middle power. You have the multilateral aspects. I think countries who engage more in a middle power, who engage more in the multilateral field, they are more likely considered as a middle power and not maybe as a, let's say, small country. But still, on the other side, I love to be a small country because it's sometimes, or many times, it's the speed, it's the action, it's the know-how that makes you then a middle power, or that makes you, let's say, feel that you can provide a change. Of course, there is, let's say, way forward. Why are middle powers having aspects of mediation? Because, I mean, a great power usually would always have a little bit, or at least a little bit, the tendency to dominate a region. Yeah? That middle powers, I would say, not necessarily in this pattern. By the way, most of the middle powers, or many of the middle powers, like Austria, they have a history that they once had been a great power, or an empire like Austria had been more than 100 years ago. And so they kind of, they're not grieving anymore on that, because it's most of the cases long time ago. Then they are actively interested in the multilateral field. And economically, you have this, I mean, it's more, it has become a label almost, this de-risking. What is de-risking? De-risking is becoming too much, let's say, ending the dependency too much on trade with maybe only one country or one bloc, or a number of countries, or on energy, or in military terms. This, of course, implies as well that I think many of the middle powers, I would call it in terms of their swing states. If you see, you cannot say like maybe 20, 30, 40 years before you had the non-aligned countries. It's different because you have the possibility and you have the experience of swing states. If you look, for example, and as I have the last 3-4 years worked obviously very much on the subject Russia, Ukraine. If you look, for example, at how it moved from the resolutions in the United Nations in spring 22, right after when Russian war of aggression started, that you had about more than 140 countries aligning to these resolutions, condemning that. And then 3 years later, this February, suddenly you had only 93 countries aligning to this resolution. Of course, there was the competition of in parallel having the US resolution, but the title of the resolution was a lot, let's say, a lot more inclusive. It was called Advancing a Comprehensive, Just and Lasting Peace in Ukraine. So who should be against it, you know? But of course there was the other resolution in parallel, so there was a swing. There were, if you take it from 144 countries, yes votes to 93. By the way, the other resolution, as you know, got also 93. They did abstain at the end, so if not, they abstained for their own resolution, otherwise they would have won the competition with 94 against 93, which is also a small absurdity. But you could see that there is a swing. You cannot, in such short time frame, so you have to constantly see what are the reasons, what are the values. And of course, we would say, you know, for us the multilateral system is rule of law, protection of human rights, also protection of private property. But where did the swing come from? Yeah. So that's one aspect, I think, for the swing. So a continued outreach that had always two sides, of course, has to go on, I think, also amongst the middle powers. And also in the new formats. I mean, you had suddenly you have this BRICS Plus that it was for a decade or more. It was BRICS. You know, it was easy to remember each letter for a country. Now I think, who would be able to say automatically who are the members of the BRICS Plus? You know, and you had the BRICS Plus summit in Kazan, where you had all kinds of special guests. In the G20, it was more structured. You had the G20, and I think the host country who hosted the summit was allowed to invite one additional guest. So the whole thing became a little more complicated. Or you have in Europe the 3Cs initiative, in, let's say, more or less in ranging from the north to the south to the Adriatic, but stopping, it's not member, and then stopping somewhere at the Balkans. But this is also a chance, I think, if we get to this pattern, not interested in dominating a region, having the multilateral interest, respect also that any kind of outreach to another middle power should be based off not only outreaching there, but inreaching as well, to take something on board. I think then I'm hopeful. I mean, neutrality, gives us some additional, let's say, flexibility, but I would also not overrate it. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Sees multilateralism and role of middle powers in the contemporary geopolitical order. Pakistan's perspective, please.
Thank you. In terms of talking about middle powers, it might not be in the exact terms. I'm given to speak about multilateralism, the significance of multilateralism, and the role of middle powers therein. To begin with, in theory, multilateralism is a great equalizer in that it gives an equal voice to all the states. For the middle powers, a rule-based freedom of arbitrary action of greater powers. So in that sense, multilateralism is a great security assurance for the middle powers. And we would like to see more multilateralism. Now, when we say a rule-based global order, I think we have to give it is standing up for the global order and who is trying to undermine the global order. By global order, many countries, middle powers like Pakistan, mean a global order as envisaged under the Charter of the United Nations. We would like to have such a global order which is equitable. It does not represent a certain worldview specific to one group of countries. So that is the kind of global order we are looking for. Since the end of Cold War, there have been many more independent states in Africa, in Asia, in Asia Pacific, in Latin America, and these are middle powers. And each of these states has its own distinct historical experience, its governance system, its cultural heritage. And this is the diversity which any global order needs to respect. Because if a global order respects diversity, it is consensus-based and it is equitable. Only then this global order will have a buy-in. And a global order which has a buy-in will really ensure order. It will have many less divergences among the member states. And at the center of the global order should be the UN, which should be enabled to play its role in the maintenance of peace and security, in terms of defining the agenda for development, and also in terms of human rights and norm setting. With these remarks, I'll just briefly give you a snapshot of the current geopolitical environment with reference to the primary areas of responsibility of the UN. And that is number 1, peace and security, number 2, economic development and growth and trade, of course, and number 3, human rights norm setting. Number 1, with respect to peace and security, we are seeing continuing conflicts in Ukraine, in the Middle East, in South Asia. The question which needs to be asked here is, do we see the UN to be relevant in all these conflicts, or is the UN sitting on the sidelines? And the question number 2 is, are these conflicts new, or they are continuing from the past? So, to get a response to this, let me point out what we did during the last decade of the 20th century and the first decade of this century. There was an extraordinary period of bonhomie between the great powers at the end of the Cold War. And this was the time when we should have come together and build consensus on UN reforms to enable it to play its role in collective security, in development, in human rights. But unfortunately, there was that notion of victory. There were proclamations of end of history and a very misplaced expectation of a monolithic and uniform trajectory of mankind, of expectation, and it did not realize. The conflicts which were papered over, they re-emerged, and that gave rise to new fears and a global power contestation. And this is what we are having right now. So, and there is a discourse on the inevitability of Thucydides' trap. We've seen arms control treaties between Russia and the US being eroded. They have impact at the global level, but more so at the regional level as well, because it has a trickle-down effect, in that a regional middle power or a regional greater power sees it as an acceptable behavior to disregard existing international and multilateral agreements. So this is the responsibility of the middle powers now to uphold the multilateral system. We have new theaters of warfare. We talk about space warfare. We talk about cyber security, cyber warfare. So this is becoming a very uncertain world. There are encouraging developments. The global powers are reaching out to each other in terms of forging a solution in Ukraine, in terms of engagements in the Middle East, in terms of bilateral understandings on tariff. But these are bilateral and small group engagements. Their durability in the long run is not assured. Till the time that it is not anchored in the UN, it is not consensus based, any solutions coming out of such bilateral or small group engagements might not be aligned with the UN principles and purposes of the UN Charter. So there is a need to make the UN more relevant in these developments. On the second primary responsibility of the UN, which is trade, development and sustainability, we are seeing actions which are not consistent with the win-win free trade model of the WTO framework. And this free model brought a lot of prosperity and growth in countries around the world. It was based on efficiencies and comparative advantages. Now we are trying to introduce groupings not based on win-win free interactions, but on like-mindedness. And that is antithetical to the spirit of globalization. The role of technology is becoming increasingly important, driven by breathtaking advances in artificial intelligence, quantum computing, in additive manufacturing, in biotechnology. Now all these are force multipliers for development in terms of enabling the countries global challenges, current day challenges of climate change, poverty, hunger, water, energy, food security. Yet at the same time, these technologies can negatively impact societies and military conflict. What we see is that rather than having an open discourse at the multilateral forums on equitable access to these technologies for socio-economic development, and at the same time on having regulations to monitor the possibly negative uses of technology, the technology holders have initiated processes in the name of supply chain security or de-risking, whereby new technopoles or technology poles are being established. And this is very dangerous because technology is needed by the countries to achieve these SDGs. But if we have a politically fragmented world with technopoles, collective responses to global challenges will become very difficult. So we need to have a system for access to technology while at the same time a multilaterally negotiated regulatory framework for regulating the negative impacts of these technologies. Now, we saw during the COVID-19 pandemic, this is a very much interdependent world. You cannot have technopoles. During the pandemic, we saw that countries were dependent on each other in terms of disease surveillance, in terms of vaccines, in terms of treatment equipment. So we cannot fight the global challenges like pandemics by sitting in silos. So then SDGs itself. SDGs provided us a global consensus in terms of where we want to go, including sustainability, including poverty alleviation, including fighting climate change. So that was a consensus that this is the roadmap for the future. Unfortunately, SDGs themselves have the consensus on SDGs themselves has eroded. And without such a consensus on the future development agenda, where will we go as an international community? So all the more reason for the middle powers to get down together, to try to preserve multilateralism, to try to preserve the international achievements which we gained when we agreed on the sustainable development agenda. Finally, human rights and norm-setting role of the UN. The statement by Canada, France, UK, and the statement by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Austria regarding the situation in Gaza. But is it too late and too little? We saw a genocide happening in front of our eyes, real time. We saw collective punishment with children being targeted, with populations being targeted, and we did very little. So we need to have uniform standards. Our minister, the keynote speaker spoke about what happened few weeks back in South Asia in Pahalgam, the international community, including Pakistan, had one voice in condemning terrorism. And there can be no justification for terrorism. Pakistan also condemned it. But at the same time, there are other principles which were upheld in the case of Ukraine. But unfortunately, we didn't see such an inclination to and support for the principles which were very much to which a lot of premium was attached in the case of Ukraine, which was right to self-defense, territorial integrity and sovereignty. Despite Pakistan's offer to India for a neutral investigation, because we knew we were not involved, India did not listen to us. They attacked Pakistan. Pakistan showed a lot of restraint. We held back for 4 days. Yet, we did not see a single statement condemning attack, aggression by India on Pakistan, or upholding the principle of sovereignty of Pakistan or its territorial integrity. So these kinds of double standards, if you have them, this exceptionalism, this will undermine the credibility of any international order. International order will only be an order which is respected if it is equitable. So finally, what is the way forward? As I said earlier, middle powers have to shape, sustain and embrace international norms and rules. We have to promote free trade agreements, business partnerships, investments, development assistance. Multilateralism, yes, it has failed, but do we do away with multilateralism? I think we need more multilateralism. When the League of Nations failed, we did not have any a better solution than to have a UN, which was stronger than the League of Nations. So we need a reformed UN. But what kind of a reformed UN? A UN which does away with the anachronisms of veto, because veto has crippled the UN. The greater powers do not allow consensus in the Security Council and the UN become paralyzed. So we have to do UN reform, taking into account the emergence of new middle powers and their interests and the need for their representation. We have to have alliances between middle powers based on issues, issue-based alliances going beyond the hardwired groupings of NAM and G77 and other groupings which are reminiscent of the Cold War. Is the Thucydides trap inevitable? We as Pakistan believe it is very much, because we see powers which are emerging but existing system. It's not in their interest to challenge the system. They would like to reap the benefits of this system and further strengthen it. And number two, there are a lot of interdependencies, unlike the Cold War. So these interdependencies would not allow a polar world again, a bipolar world. So we think Thucydides trap, the talk about Thucydides trap is crap. So we should not fall into that. Finally, for the middle powers, there are very good examples in countries like ASEAN. These are the countries which saw a lot of conflict, a lot of civil war, a lot of societal repression because of the geopolitics which was going on during the Cold War. Post-Cold War, they integrated into the international economic system. They became the beneficiaries. They integrated into the international supply chains. They developed two-way dependencies with the greater powers, and rather than one-way dependencies. And that is where they gained leverages, whereby they can balance between various contenders for power at the international level. So this way, countries, middle powers can collaborate with each other and create leverages for themselves. Another good example is EU. By ensuring inclusivity and by ensuring integration, economic integration, EU was also able to ensure peace and security, because when countries are integrated, then there is an incentive to find amicable solutions to political disputes. So what we need is multi-alignment is in a multipolar world. Going beyond the traditional group thinking, block thinking of the Cold War. De-risking of supply chains will lead to fragmentation. What is the best way of ensuring undisrupted supply chains? The best way is to have free flow of technology and not allow concentration of technology in certain areas and regions. The more the technology spreads, the more we will ensure free flow of technology and disruptions against human or natural elements. So we need that. Inclusivity within the societies is also very important, because inequalities within the societies, it gives a space to populist leaders to propagate their anti-globalization agendas. Now, what are the best equalizers within societies? It is education and gainful employment. And that is where middle parts have a role to play. By cooperating with either in programs such as the Erasmus Mundus program, the Horizon Europe program, exchange of scholarships, capacity buildings, collaborations with focus on sustainability, green economies, agriculture, digital connectivity. Digital connectivity is very important because we have a literally digitally literate population, young population. There is a demand in the West, and we can bridge these gaps. And digitally literate population sitting inside our own country can provide services over here. And thus we can also address that concern regarding immigration. Finally, I believe that it is in the interest of bigger powers also to promote inclusive institutions such as the G20, where middle powers are provided platforms to express themselves. And the bigger powers should also support international norms and standards, because a disorderly world will eventually not be in their interest. And assigning roles like net security providers to certain regional states will be very counterproductive. It will be like bestowing upon them a sense of entitlement to amass military muscle beyond their genuine national security requirements. This will be a recipe for instability. So, security concerns of all states should be accorded equal priority. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
In Farsi. That means that Farsi was a language, Persian language of diplomacy or academy, and therefore Iran is having this way, and we have to work closely. I congratulate Diplomat Academy to have so many meetings here. Since 43 years ago, I came first as ambassador. I've been many times here, and congratulate for this environment, academic environment. Now, we have to be very realistic. Of course, there is some criticism here we have had. Working over 40 years with the United Nations, I'm very disappointed that perhaps I spent my life 4 years. Now I see UN system totally paralyzed in the unprecedented genocide that no one could believe it. And the thousands, let's say millions of people are in the streets, but nobody cares. But just simple veto, even the ceasefires are stopped. I am now, of course, in the other capacity as the president of Vienna International Institute for Middle East Studies. I'm retired. We made an initiative that General Assembly should use United for Peace resolution modality to bypass the Security Council. Unfortunately, they are not still doing it. This is a time to do something. If we cannot reform the UN, as it was said by Ambassador others, that we are all disappointed with these veto powers, which is really not democratic and disregarding the majority, at least there are some mechanism that we can use it to bypass it. This is not done, and this is very unfortunate. The other things, I can stop here because the time is short. We have been witnessing the US, which was one of the founders of the UN, have either one-party Democrats are instrumental using the multilateralism international organizations. There are many examples I can tell you from my experience in Geneva here and there. And then the other one, Republicans came openly against any multilateralism, against any international organizations, as we have seen it. We see a sort of anarchy in the hierarchy of the United States, rather than helping this multilateralism we're talking about. This is unfortunate. We were hoping that non-aligned movement, which Irani's party, and I was president of the non-aligned movement here 3 years when I was ambassador, or G77, they were supposed to be highlighted and to be some sort of middle powers, stand vis-a-vis the big powers and against hegemony, but they have not been that active as they were. But I think I'm still, despite all this negative and pessimism, I still am hopeful that the think tanks, this kind of scholarly talks, can enlighten the people to at least think about and put pressure on politicians. I'm not a politician anymore. Political decision makers, not to make mistakes and miscalculations and put everything right track. And still I'm optimist.
Thank you so much.
And I have a question for the panel. So, European countries share several rivers, including the Danube and the Rhine. However, European countries have worked out their share of water. In South Asia, despite the Indus Water Treaty, India is weaponizing water and obstructing the flow of water to the lower riparian, which is Pakistan. I wanted to know the European perspective on the weaponization of water and the obstruction of the flow of water to the lower riparian. Thank you.
Well, I'm married to a professor whose subject matter is the transplanted water courses, Euphrates Tigris River. So we met in PhD studies. And I'm control guy and she's the water person. And she defends the idea for the last 30 years, as she wrote in her dissertation and onwards in her articles published all over the world and the books that she published, that water should be an element of cooperation rather than conflict, because it's so vital. You can replace water with anything else. And it's the inherent right of everyone to have access to water equitably, fairly. So the issue of sharing waters is not a simple calculus. You cannot just say, okay, there's such and such amount of water, and you should get 1/3 or half of it, or so and so proportion, and the rest goes to the others. So ways and means must definitely be found in using water equitably and efficiently, because it's getting scarce. And because of climate change, it will be even more scarce. So therefore we strongly suggest both India and Pakistan that they should sit and talk. Dialogue and diplomacy will be a solution to this, because as I said, you may spare some of the technological products, you may do away with them, you may just survive without some products, but without water, life cannot exist, it ceases to exist. So, and especially regarding the population and the structure of the industry or in this basin, I think diplomatic ways must be sort of found, which I hope will be, especially if we can leave this behind us in the whole world, the tension that arose because of the terrorist attack that took place a couple of weeks ago.
Thank you.
Mustafa, and I think you gave a very appropriate response that the only way forward is for Pakistan and India to sit down together and to negotiate. And this is what we want. But then there is a treaty, and that treaty provides for dispute resolution mechanisms, which have been suspended by India. And if we are not going to talk to each other and we are not going to resort to dispute resolution mechanisms, how else can we resolve the problem? War is not the solution to anything. And every war ends in negotiations. So we would like to have negotiations. But if a country is abrogating international law, it is not accepting dispute resolution mechanism, that is the kind of behavior which I think middle pass collectively should condemn and not encourage. And that is how we will be able to establish an international order.
Thank you. Any quick questions from this side?
Presentation. I'm positions on how the UN reform can be achieved. To me, the UN is like a piece of amber with an insect, prehistoric insect, stuck in it since, in this case, since 1945. So middle powers obviously have a role to play in pushing reform. But how do you see reform getting going? Because it's going to be next to impossible. So I very much appreciate your thoughts. Thanks, Karl.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you for the question. Of course, it's the $1 million question. I remember when in December I had a talk with Seiler, the advisor to President Lula, when he was, Seiler was, by the way, also a former student of the Diplomatic Academy, and we talked about outreach and how to be more inclusive for the countries of Latin America, and talking about, yes, now the world order has been infringed by the war in Europe, and he said, yeah, but I mean, Latin America has only 2 seats in the Security Council, whereas Europe has 5, not 2 permanent, and 3, if you count all together, non-permanent ones. What I mean that we probably, it's like my colleague from Pakistan said, that of course it's necessary to sit down, but also be ready for reforms that are meaning every side has to make a concession. I think that's, I mean, by the way, but still, I mean, the UN, even, I would not call it an prehistoric insect, it's still an important platform. It's kind of what came even with not so much into religious terms, but it's kind of holy ground where you can talk. You are on a platform and you talk with the representatives of countries where maybe your relations are very difficult, and that's a way to circumvent this obstacle that you won't invite them for a bilateral meeting, because then it would, we don't invite them, and they would say, no, we don't. When someone has to make the first step, and sometimes it takes then maybe decades and it never happens. But that's the big advantage of the UN, that you are there and you talk, and sometimes the corridor talk is more important than the official meeting where you read your statement. But yes, sure, reform has to come. I mean, I wouldn't say it's hopeless. Sometimes even this now geopolitical dynamics with new formats, on the one way brings the UN under pressure, and the other way shows also that, because before you had maybe also these regional organizations, you had it only regional, and this was also kind of a threat, because you would not then, let's say, one regional organization in Asia would communicate with one regional organization in Europe, maybe through social media, then it would even better work. You just put a tweet or an X out and tell the other side what's your position. But you see now that it can work from different regions as well. But I think the UN is still at the core. And criticizing is important. Reform is also important, but I see it like criticizing democracy. Of course, it has its shortcomings, but I don't see so much better alternatives, and that's for the UN as well. I mean, okay, you had the League of Nations that was, I think, doomed even more to fail. But there are also success stories of the UN. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Mustafa, you have something to say?
We teach our students that there are basically 2 schools of thought. One believes in or sees the world from a realist perspective, the other sees the world from an idealist perspective. Those who believe in relative power, it's promise of power which lays everything in there after poverty. So the more powerful you are, the more you can do anything you want. But on the other hand, there is those who believe in supremacy of law, international law, just like Ambassador Akhtar Malik mentioned, multilateralism in my word, international law is an equalizer. It brings to the same level the smallest country on the most powerful country, if that small country is aware of its rights and liabilities, and uses its sovereign policy to advance or protect its rights vis-à-vis the most powerful countries. So UN reform is a must. I mean, there is no question about that. And even those who have veto power acknowledge that, but they don't want to sit and talk. And so the more you postpone to the future, the more countries are becoming aware that, relying on international law, international organization, multilateralism will not the solution to their problems, and they will try to find ways that will bring them or take them to levels that can acquire capabilities that will in turn pose threat to the most powerful countries that have maybe tens of or thousands of nuclear weapons or other weapons of mass destruction. So, no one can win the war with nuclear weapons, and therefore it should not be fought, as has been mentioned several times, as a personal nuclear non-proliferation in our field. So, I believe the sooner weak powers acknowledge that UN must be reformed, and there are many, many ways. Even I have written and also extensive on the subject, also taught this or assigned this as a term paper subject to my students, who came up with brilliant ideas that can be put in force, provided that there is consensus, or at least understanding that, okay, now it's time after some 80 years, the whole world governance structure must change. So that's why the sooner they acknowledge that without respecting even the smallest country's rights, the world will not be a better place to live, and they will find a way to hurt you. And your, I don't know, maybe unmatched capabilities, military capabilities, or richness, or economic power will not help you. So that is the issue that those who govern big powers, major powers, must acknowledge it sooner better. Thank you.
My question is more for the mechanistic of the UN. So, of course, we all believe that the UN should play a central dogma when it comes to the global world order. But think about that we have more than dozens of the UN resolutions on Kashmir dispute. And it is still not going anywhere, and it is still not working. So what will be, or what should be the mechanistic for the future if we still know that those middle powers are struggling, and considering this dozens of resolutions and they are still not being implemented, are still not being regarded by one of the state. In this case, clearly it's the India. And what do you think that will be the future mechanistic way of UN dealing such situations that they have the ground for the last 50 years and those dozens of resolutions, and still they were unable to be implemented? Thank you.
When I was in Kashmir, we had to address the media, and first a former defense minister addressed it, then a general, and then here was I, like insignificant NGO representative who doesn't have so much experience. But then I was thinking, when we look at Europe, we had like wars for hundreds of years, and we never thought that we will be ever able to solve this problem, So at the end of the day, we have now peace on the European continent. The Germans are friends with the French. Nobody would ever think to start a war again against each other, Even the Germans lost territory in the Second World War. Still, they don't have this mindset. So I said, look, if we Europeans, the most stupid of all people in the world, managed to establish peace, and the most like friends of wars, you will also manage. Just have hope and do whatever you can do. The most important thing, I think, is to communicate on all kinds of levels, even among the religious leaders, to find some way, because anyway, it started very much with a religious dispute, or with, the alliance with one religion. So I think there's hope. This is what I say.
Thank you. Questions answered, but we can continue our discussions over a very delightful Pakistani cuisine. It has been a very constructive and enlightening session, and we're extremely thankful to Diplomatic Academy, the director, our distinguished panelists, and all our guests for joining us today. Before we leave, we request you to enjoy Pakistani cuisine and a settled gathering. And a big round of applause for everybody.
जी अस्सलाम वालेकुम। आज हमने पाकिस्तान एम्बेसी ने वियना डिप्लोमेटिक एकेडमी में एक सेमिनार अरेंज किया था ऑन द रोल ऑफ मिडिल पावर्स इन द इवॉल्विंग ग्लोबल ऑर्डर। इस सेमिनार में हमारे पास ईयू के एम्बेसडर भी आए एज स्पीकर, चाइना के एम्बेसडर भी आए, ऑस्ट्रियन एम्बेसडर भी आए और बहुत ज़्यादा एकेडमिशियंस भी आए। हमने टर्किश एक एकेडमिशियन को भी बुलाया हुआ था और बहुत अच्छी ऑडियंस आई थी। वियना की डिप्लोमेटिक कम्युनिटी से बहुत लोग आए थे, फिर यहाँ पे स्टूडेंट कम्युनिटी से बहुत लोग आए थे। यहाँ पे की नोट स्पीकर मैडम हिना रब्बानी खर थी, जो कि हमारी फॉरेन मिनिस्टर हैं, और उनकी शिरकत की वजह से बहुत ज़्यादा इंटरेस्ट जनरेट हुआ और इस इवेंट ने हमें बहुत अच्छा मौका दिया कि वियना की टॉप एलीट में, डिप्लोमेटिक कम्युनिटी में, एकेडेमिया में पाकिस्तान का नुक्ता नज़र बयान करें, जो मौजूदा आलमी हालात हैं उनके हवाले से, प्लस जो अभी रिसेंटली पाकिस्तान और इंडिया के दरमियान एक क्राइसिस हुआ था उसके हवाले से, इंडस वाटर ट्रीटी के हवाले से, और इसका हमें बहुत ज़्यादा फ़ायदा हुआ है। हमने इस आउटरीच से बाद में फॉलो अप भी करेंगे अपने पाकिस्तान के मफादात के लिए। थैंक यू।
Okay, we are here at the Diplomatic Academy in Vienna, the School for International Studies, and it was an initiative of the Pakistani embassy to organize a panel discussion on the role of middle countries in our international world order. And it was a very high-level, interesting panel with representatives from different countries and organizations, China, the European Union, Turkey, NGOs, also the Austrian Foreign Ministry was represented, and in the end it was, not to forget, Mrs. Hina Rabbani Khar, the former Foreign Minister of Pakistan and now the head of the Foreign Relations Committee of the National Assembly. She also gave a keynote speech, and it was a plaidoyer for multilateralism. We all have to work together to make this world a better place.
So today we had a great conference here in the Diplomatic Academy of Vienna about basically the importance of middle powers, and it was said Pakistan is maybe one of the typical and also relevant middle powers because it takes great interest also in the United Nations, and also of course it is one of the most populous nations nations in the world. And of course, there's this issue of Kashmir, which is heavy on the heart of every Pakistani. It was also addressed here in some detail. But generally, of course, middle powers have a good chance to take influence because they are not so much like depending to be in the front row, so they can support good developments, and in this way also Pakistan can play a leading role in several issues. And we all hope that also the conflict between India and Pakistan can be somehow resolved. And I think also the interfaith dialogue should be and can be helpful in this matter.
जी, जैसे कि आज हम मौजूद थे वियना डिप्लोमेट एकेडमी में, और आपने देखा पाकिस्तान एम्बेसी की जानिब से ये प्रोग्राम जो था जिसके अंदर बहुत सारे डिप्लोमेट्स और सिफारतकार मौजूद थे, और यहाँ पर चाइना से लेकर तुर्की और दूसरी कंट्रीज़ के ईरान से भी और मुख्तलिफ कंट्रीज से जो है वो सिफारतकार आए थे। तो उम्मीद करते हैं आपको ये मेरा प्रोग्राम अच्छा लगा होगा। तो वी विल मीट इन माई नेक्स्ट प्रोग्राम। थैंक यू वेरी मच। बाय बाय।